The Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their warships numbered in the millions. Their conquered species numbered in the hundreds. They controlled every trade route, every habitable planet, and every intelligent species they had ever encountered. The Empire had never known defeat. The Empire had never known fear. The Empire believed it would rule forever. Then the USS Valar appeared. The ship materialized in the heart of Imperial space without any warning. There was no hyperspace signature. There was no warp trail. There was no energy burst that the Imperial sensors could detect. One moment, the space was empty. The next moment, a vessel unlike anything the Empire had ever seen was floating right next to one of their major military stations. Captain Daniel Morris stood on the bridge of Earth's first interstellar warship. He was a tall man with calm brown eyes and gray hair at his temples. He had served in the Earth Defense Force for 30 years. He had trained for this moment for the last 15 of those years. He looked at the tactical display and watched his 37 Imperial cruisers scramble to form a defensive perimeter around the station. Commander Katie Sullivan stood beside him. She was his executive officer and his most trusted friend. Her red hair was tied back in a tight bun, and her green eyes were fixed on the sensor readings. She reported that Imperial communications were going crazy with panicked transmissions. Nobody on those ships understood what had just happened. The Valor had emerged from something the humans called a fold space jump. This technology compressed the fabric of space itself and allowed a ship to travel 40,000 light years in the blink of an eye. The Imperial scientists had declared such travel physically impossible. They had written entire academic papers proving it could never be done. The humans had done it anyway. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, Admiral Azirath stared at his holographic display in complete disbelief. He was a Corvan, a large reptilian creature with 4 eyes and scales the color of dark bronze. He had served the Empire for 200 years. He had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He had never seen anything like this. His tactical officers were shouting reports at him. The strange vessel matched nothing in the Imperial database. Its hull was made of materials they could not identify. Its weapon systems were completely unfamiliar, and its arrival method had left no trace that their sensors could find. Azirath demanded silence on his bridge. He needed to think. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. His science officer suggested that the vessel might have come from outside the known galaxy. His weapons officer recommended immediate destruction of the unknown ship. His communications officer reported that the vessel was attempting to hail them. Azirath ordered his crew to open a channel. He wanted to see what kind of creature commanded this impossible ship. When the view screen activated and Daniel Morris appeared before him, Azirath felt something he had not experienced in a very long time. He felt confusion. The creature on the screen was small and soft-skinned. It had only 2 eyes. Its body showed no natural weapons, no claws, no armored plates, no venomous fangs. It looked fragile and weak. The translator identified the species as human, but there was no entry for humans in the Imperial database. Daniel Morris spoke in a calm and steady voice. He introduced himself as the captain of the United Earthship Valor. He said that he came representing the human race. He said that he was there to discuss the liberation of the Imperial slave populations. For a moment, there was complete silence on the Imperial bridge. Then Admiral Azirath began to laugh. The sound was deep and rumbling, and it echoed across the metal walls. His officers joined him in the laughter. This tiny creature commanding a single ship was making demands of the Galactic Empire. It was the most absurd thing Azirath had ever heard. Azirath told the human that he was surrounded. He told the human that resistance was pointless. He offered the human a choice. Surrender the vessel immediately, and the Empire might preserve the human species as servants rather than cattle. Refuse in the Empire would destroy the ship and track down the human homeworld and reduce it to ashes. Daniel Morris did not look afraid. He did not look worried. He simply smiled at the Admiral and said that he was hoping the Carven would say something like that. On the Valor, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Burke sat at the weapons console. He was a muscular man with a shaved head and steady hands. He had spent 15 years in the Earth Defense Force before being selected for this mission. He had trained on every weapon system humanity had ever built. He reported to the captain that he had target locks on all 37 Imperial vessels. Katie Sullivan raised an eyebrow and asked if he meant all of them at the same time. Ryan confirmed that he did. He explained that their targeting systems had been designed for engagements against entire naval fleets. 37 slow-moving cruisers was actually a light workload for the system. Admiral Zyrith ordered his fleet to move into attack formation. The Imperial cruisers arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around the human vessel. Their plasma cannons began charging with a deadly orange glow. This was a standard Imperial tactic that had crushed 1,000 rebellions across the galaxy. Daniel gave his order. He told Ryan to fire warning shots only. He wanted the Imperial weapons disabled, but he wanted 0 casualties. Ryan acknowledged the order, and his fingers moved across the console. The Valor's railguns fired in perfect synchronization. 37 tungsten rounds accelerated to 12% of the speed of light. 37 precision strikes hit 37 Imperial cruisers in exactly 1.3 seconds. Every weapon system on every Imperial ship went dark. Every shield generator failed. Every offensive capability was surgically eliminated. The Imperial ships were intact. The Imperial crews were alive. But Admiral Zyrith's fleet was now completely defenseless. Zyrith stared at his tactical display as every system reported critical damage. His weapons were gone. His shields were gone. His fleet had been reduced to floating metal in less than 2 seconds. He whispered a single word: impossible. On the Valor, Lieutenant Megan Torres reported from the communications station. She said that the Imperials were broadcasting a general distress call. They were claiming that the humans had used some kind of dark matter weapon or forbiddance technology. Daniel shook his head slowly. He explained that they had just used good old-fashioned tungsten rounds moving very fast. There was nothing fancy about it. Human engineers had simply figured out how to accelerate metal to incredible speeds. It was basic physics pushed to its limits. Chief Engineer Scott Palmer called up from the engineering deck. He reported that the full drive was already recharged and ready for another jump whenever the captain needed it. Katie was astonished and asked if it was really ready so quickly. Scott explained that they had jumped 40,000 light years to get here. A few hundred light years to the Imperial capital would be nothing. Daniel looked at the view screen. He looked at the disabled Imperial fleet floating helplessly in space. He looked at the station filled with enslaved species from across the galaxy. Humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment. They had worked in secret ever since the first Imperial probe had been detected entering the solar system in the year 24/7. Daniel ordered Megan to send a message to Earth Command. He told her to inform them that Phase 1 was complete. The Galactic Empire now knew that humanity existed, and humanity was not afraid. The news of the defeat spread across the Empire like fire through dry grass. Admiral Zyrith's fleet had been considered one of the finest in the Imperial Navy. 37 cruisers crewed by veterans of countless campaigns had been rendered helpless in less than 2 seconds. The Imperial communication networks buzzed with confusion and fear. On the Valor, Captain Daniel Morris watched the chaos unfold on his sensor displays. The Imperial station nearby was sending desperate messages to every corner of the Empire. Ships were being recalled from distant sectors. Emergency protocols that had not been used in centuries were being activated. The Empire was afraid for the first time in 12,000 years. "Commander." Katie Sullivan approached Daniel with a data tablet in her hands. She reported that their sensors had detected over 300 million life signs on the station alone. Most of those life signs belonged to species that the Empire had conquered and enslaved generations ago. These beings had never known freedom. They had been born into servitude, and they expected to die in servitude. Daniel asked how many slaves the Empire held across all its territory. Kitty checked the estimates from Earth Intelligence. The number was approximately 400 billion sentient beings held in bondage across the Imperial domain. It was a number so large that it was almost impossible to understand. Chief Science Officer Amanda Price joined them on the bridge. She was a slender woman with short black hair and intense dark eyes. She had dedicated her life to studying the Empire ever since the probe incident. She reported that she had been analyzing the Imperial response to their arrival. The Empire was not just surprised. The Empire was terrified. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that no species could challenge their technology. The humans had shattered that assumption in 1.3 seconds. Daniel nodded slowly. He said that fear could make enemies dangerous. A cornered animal would fight harder than a confident one. They needed to send a message that the Empire could not ignore. They needed to show the Empire that humanity was not interested in destruction. Humanity was interested in liberation. The Valor left the Corvin sector 3 hours after the battle. The full drive activated, and the ship vanished from Imperial sensors completely. Admiral Zyrith was left floating in space with his disabled fleet, trying to explain to his superiors what had happened. He could not explain it. He did not understand it himself. The Valor reappeared in the Thrall system 700 light years away. This system was home to one of the largest slave markets in the Empire. Billions of beings were bought and sold here every year. The station orbiting the primary planet was a massive structure filled with cages and holding cells and auction blocks. Daniel hailed the station directly. The station commander was a fat Corvin named Overseer Grax, who had grown wealthy from the slave trade. Grax demanded to know how the human ship had arrived without being detected. Daniel ignored the question. He told Grax that he had 20 minutes to release all slaves on the station and begin evacuation procedures for the station crew. Grax laughed at the demand. He informed the human that reinforcements were already on the way. 50 Imperial warships would arrive within the hour. The human vessel would be captured, and its crew would be sold at auction. Daniel simply nodded and ended the communication. He turned to Ryan Burke at the weapons console and gave a simple order. He told Ryan to remove the slave market from existence. The Valor's weapons fired in a sustained barrage that lasted exactly 30 seconds. When the firing stopped, the station was gone. Not damaged. Not disabled. Gone. The atomic bonds that held the structure together had been disrupted by focused energy beams. The station had simply ceased to exist, but every slave transport, every shuttle, every small vessel carrying enslaved beings had been left untouched. Ryan had targeted only the station infrastructure. The auction blocks and the cages and the holding cells were vapor now. The slaves were free. The Imperial reinforcements arrived 43 minutes later. They found no enemy to fight. The Valor had already jumped to another system. But they found thousands of confused and frightened beings floating in escape pods and transport ships. They found beings who had been slaves their entire lives, suddenly discovering that their masters were dead and their chains were broken. Over the next 2 weeks, the Valor visited 14 more Imperial systems. At each location, Daniel Morris delivered the same message. Humanity demanded the immediate release of all enslaved populations. Humanity would accept nothing less than the complete dissolution of the Imperial slave trade. Humanity was prepared to enforce these demands with whatever force was necessary. the Empire tried to stop them. The Empire failed every time. The Imperial fleet was designed to fight enemies who used hyperspace travel. They knew how to predict where hyperspace vessels would emerge. They knew how to set traps and ambush along hyperspace routes. But the Valor did not use hyperspace. The fold drive allowed the ship to appear literally anywhere without warning. The Imperials could not defend against what they could not predict. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Lisa Grant monitored the Valor's progress from the underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp blue eyes. She had spent her entire career preparing for this war. She reviewed every engagement report and every tactical analysis that Daniel sent back. Secretary of Defense Chris Martinez sat beside her in the command center. He was worried about the Imperial response. The Empire had millions of ships. Humanity had fewer than 100 vessels equipped with fold drives. The math did not seem to favor their side. Lisa explained the reality of the situation. Numbers did not matter when technology was mismatched this badly. One human vessel could disable an entire Imperial fleet. 100 human vessels could end the Empire entirely. But that was not the goal. The goal was not conquest. The goal was liberation. Chris asked how they planned to liberate 400 billion slaves. Lisa smiled and said that they would not do it alone. Every slave who saw an Imperial fleet defeated would start to hope. Every slave who heard about human victories would start to dream of freedom. The Empire controlled its slaves through the illusion of invincibility. Once that illusion was shattered, the slaves would rise up on their own. Far away on the Imperial throne world, Grand Empress Vesera received the reports of the human attacks with growing rage. She was ancient beyond measure, kept alive by machines that pumped chemicals through her withered body. She had ruled the Empire for 3,000 years. She had crushed every challenge to her power. She would crush this one too. She summoned her High Commander and her Intelligence Director and every admiral in the Imperial Navy. She told them to find the human homeworld. She told them to gather the largest fleet in Imperial history. She told them to prepare for total war. The humans wanted liberation. Vesera would give them extinction instead. But as her commanders rushed to obey her orders, Vesera felt something cold in her ancient chest. It was a feeling she had not experienced in millennia. It was doubt. The reports she had seen showed weapons she did not understand and technology she could not explain. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Grand Empress wondered if she had finally found an enemy she could not defeat. She pushed the doubt aside. The Empire was eternal. The Empire was invincible. No primitive species from an unknown world could challenge. 12,000 years of galactic dominance. She would soon learn how wrong she was. Admiral Zyrith had been summoned to the Imperial throne world. He expected to be executed for his failure. He had lost an entire battle fleet to a single enemy vessel. In 12,000 years of Imperial history, no admiral had ever suffered such a humiliating defeat. He walked into the throne room prepared to die. Grand Empress Vesera looked down at him from her massive mechanical throne. Her body was little more than a skeleton wrapped in synthetic skin. Tubes and wires connected her to the life support systems that kept her ancient heart beating. Her eyes were artificial now, but they still burned with the same cold. Intelligence that had conquered a galaxy. She did not order his execution. Instead, she ordered him to speak. She wanted to know everything about the human vessel and its captain. She wanted to understand the enemy that had humiliated her empire. Zyrith described the battle in complete detail. He explained how the human ship had appeared without warning. He described the impossible speed of their weapons. He admitted that his fleet had been completely helpless against their technology. But then, he said something that surprised even himself. He told the Empress that the humans had shown mercy. They could have destroyed every ship in his fleet. They could have killed every crew member under his command. Instead, they had targeted only weapons and shields. They had disabled his fleet without killing a single Coven. Xyrith did not understand why an enemy would do such a thing. Vexera considered his words carefully. Mercy was a concept she had abandoned millennia ago. Mercy was weakness in her view. But perhaps these humans were using mercy as a tactic. Perhaps they were trying to make the Empire doubt itself. Perhaps they understood that fear of the unknown was more powerful than fear of death. Intelligence. Director Krath entered the throne room with a data tablet clutched in his clawed hands. He was a small creature from a species the Empire had conquered 8,000 years ago. His people had proven useful as spies and analysts, so they had been allowed to serve rather than labor. Krath had spent the past 2 weeks gathering every piece of information he could find about humanity. The report he presented was disturbing. Humans came from a small planet called Earth in a distant arm of the galaxy. They were a young species whose civilization was barely 10,000 years old. Their industrial age had begun less than 3 centuries ago. By every measurement the Empire used, they should have been primitive creatures barely capable of space travel. Instead, they had developed technology that surpassed anything the Empire had achieved in 12 millennia. Their full drive allowed instantaneous travel across any distance. Their weapons fired projectiles at speeds the Imperial shields could not stop. Their ships were made of materials the Imperial scientists could not identify. Vexera demanded an explanation. How had such a young species advanced so quickly? Krath did not have a complete answer, but he had a theory. He said that humans appeared to be driven by something the Empire had never seen before. They called it competition. Humans constantly struggled against each other and against their environment. They formed rival nations and fought devastating wars. They pushed the boundaries of science and engineering in ways that seemed almost obsessive. Every challenge they faced seemed to make them stronger rather than weaker. Krath showed the Empress records of human history. In a single century, humans had fought 2 global wars that killed hundreds of millions of their own kind. Any other species would have collapsed into ruin after such destruction. Humans had emerged from those wars more powerful than before. Each conflict had driven new innovations. Their weapons technology had advanced more during their world wars than Imperial technology had advanced in 5,000 years. Hi, Commander Torvax spoke for the first time. He was a massive Corvan warrior covered in battle scars. He asked a simple question. Why had the Empire never encountered humans before now? Krath pulled up another file on his tablet. In the year 2047 by human counting, an Imperial seeding probe had entered the human solar system. These probes were sent to primitive worlds to prepare their populations for eventual conquest. The probe carried a biological agent designed to make the target species more compliant and easier to control. The humans had detected the probe. They had tracked it across their solar system. They had shot it down before it could complete its mission. Then they had recovered the wreckage and reverse-engineered every piece of technology they found inside. Vexera understood immediately. The Empire had tried to domesticate humanity before they became a threat. The Empire had failed, and the humans had used Imperial technology as the foundation for their own advancement. Everything the Valor carried was built on secrets the Empire had accidentally given them. On the Valor, Chief Science Officer Amanda Price was explaining the same history to Captain Daniel Morris. She had completed a genetic analysis of every species they had encountered in Imperial space. The results confirmed what Earth intelligence had long suspected. Every species in the Empire showed signs of genetic tampering. The Corvan had been engineered for obedience centuries ago. Natural aggression had been bred out of their population over generations. The Thrall were even worse. Their entire capacity for independent thought had been suppressed through careful manipulation of their breeding. The Empire did not just conquer species. It domesticated them. It turned proud civilizations into docile herds that would never challenge imperial authority. Every slave in the Empire was the product of this systematic destruction of free will. Daniel asked what would have happened if the probe had succeeded in 2047. Amanda looked at him with sad eyes. She said that humanity would have become like the others. Within a few generations, humans would have lost their drive and their creativity and their stubborn refusal to accept limits. They would have welcomed the Empire as masters rather than fighting back. Katie Sullivan had been listening quietly. She spoke in a voice tight with anger. She said that the Empire had tried to make humanity into something it was not. The Empire had tried to break the human spirit before humans even knew the Empire existed. And the Empire had failed. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood now why this mission was about more than politics or military strategy. Humanity was fighting for the very concept of free will. They were fighting to prove that sentient beings could not be engineered into submission. They were fighting for every species that had been twisted and broken by imperial tampering. He ordered Katie to contact Earth Command immediately. He told her to inform Fleet Admiral Grant that they needed to accelerate the timeline. The truth about imperial genetic tampering changed everything. The slaves across the Empire were not just prisoners. They were victims of crimes against the very nature of consciousness. The Empire did not just need to be defeated. The Empire needed to fall completely. Every trace of imperial control needed to be erased. Every enslaved species needed a chance to rediscover what freedom truly meant. Daniel looked out at the stars through the bridge viewport. Somewhere out there, 400 billion beings were waiting to learn that they could be more than what the Empire had made them. Humanity would teach them. Humanity would show them what free will look like, and then the galaxy would change forever. Grand Empress Vexera gave the order that would seal the fate of her empire. She commanded every warship in Imperial territory to gather at the throne world. She demanded that the largest fleet in galactic history be assembled within 30 days. She intended to crush humanity with overwhelming force. Ships began arriving from every corner of the Empire. The battle cruisers that had patrolled the outer territories for centuries abandoned their posts. Destroyer squadrons that had enforced Imperial law on conquered worlds packed their weapons and jumped to hyperspace. Transport vessels carried millions of soldiers from garrison duties to the mustering points around the throne world. By the end of the month, 11,000 warships orbited the Imperial capital. It was a display of military might that had never been seen before in recorded history. The ships formed a wall of metal and weapons that stretched across the void like an artificial ring around the planet. Every vessel was fully armed and crewed by veterans of the Imperial military. High Commander Torvax stood on the bridge of his new flagship and looked upon his assembled fleet. He felt pride swelling in his scaled chest. No enemy could stand against such power. The humans might have superior technology, but they could not have more than a handful of ships. Numbers would overwhelm quality. The Empire would prevail as it always had. But Torvax kept his doubts hidden behind his confident exterior. Admiral Zyrith's words haunted him. The human captain had looked into Imperial eyes and showed no fear. The humans had demonstrated mercy when they could have demonstrated destruction. These were not the actions of a desperate enemy. These were the actions of a predator so confident in its power that it did not need to prove anything. On Earth, the human fleet was making its own preparations. Fleet Admiral Lisa Grant stood in the massive hangar beneath the Rocky Mountains and watched as the final vessels were loaded with supplies and ammunition. 47 ships carrying the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built were preparing for the greatest battle in human history. The ships were not large by Imperial standards. The biggest human vessel was less than half the size of an Imperial battlecruiser. But size was meaningless when technology was so mismatched. Each human ship carried railguns capable of accelerating tungsten projectiles to a significant fraction of the speed of light. Each ship carried energy weapons that could disrupt molecular bonds at the atomic level. Each ship carried a full drive that allowed instantaneous travel across any distance. Captain Daniel Morris arrived at the command center for the final briefing. He had spent the past month preparing his crew for what was coming. The Valor would lead the assault wing in the upcoming battle. They would punch through the Imperial formation and draw fire while the other human vessels moved into position. Lisa Grant welcomed Daniel with a firm handshake. She told him that his actions over the past month had exceeded every expectation. The Imperial slave populations were already beginning to stir. Reports were coming in from across the empire of uprisings and rebellions inspired by human victories. The illusion of Imperial invincibility had been shattered, and the slaves were starting to believe that freedom was possible. Secretary Martinez joined them with updated intelligence reports. Imperial scouts had been detected probing the outer edges of human territory. The Empire was searching for Earth. They had not found it yet, but they were getting closer. The human fleet needed to strike before the Empire discovered the location of humanity's homeworld. Daniel asked about the evacuation plans. Lisa confirmed that civilian populations were being moved to underground shelters across the planet. If the battle went badly and the Empire discovered Earth, the surface might become uninhabitable. But humanity had prepared for this possibility for 2 centuries. Survival bunkers had been built deep enough to withstand orbital bombardment. The human species would survive no matter what happened in the coming conflict. Katie Sullivan had been analyzing the tactical situation. She presented her assessment to the gathered officers. The Imperial fleet was massive, but it was designed to fight enemies using conventional technology. Imperial tactics assumed that enemies would approach through predictable hyperspace routes. Imperial defenses assumed that enemies would need to target specific weak points to penetrate their shields. Humans would do neither of those things. The full drive would allow the fleet to appear inside the Imperial formation rather than approaching from outside. The railguns would bypass Imperial shields entirely since the shields were designed to stop energy weapons not solid. Projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The human fleet would be outnumbered more than 200 to 1. But Katie calculated that human technology provided an effective combat advantage of roughly 50 to 1 in their favor. The math still looked dangerous, but it was far better than the raw numbers suggested. Chief Engineer Scott Palmer had been working on modifications to the full drive systems. He reported that he had found a way to coordinate the drives across the entire fleet. All 47 ships could emerge from fold space at exactly the same moment in a synchronized attack pattern. The Imperials would have no time to react before the battle was already decided. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Millions of humans were counting on the fleet to protect their world. Billions of enslaved beings across the galaxy were counting on humanity to deliver them from bondage. This was the moment that everything had been building toward. He gathered his senior officers for a final meeting before departure. Ryan Burke reported that weapon systems were functioning at full capacity. Megan Torres confirmed that communication arrays were ready to coordinate with the rest of the fleet. Amanda Price had prepared detailed scans of Imperial vessel weaknesses for targeting purposes. Everyone was ready. The human fleet launched on a clear morning with blue skies over the Rocky Mountains. The ships rose from hidden hangars scattered across the continent and gathered in orbit around Earth. For a brief moment, they hung in space above the planet that had given birth to their species. Then the fold drives activated and they vanished. The journey across 40,000 light years took less than a second. The human fleet emerged from fold space at the edge of the Imperial system and began its final approach to the throne world. Sensors detected the massive Imperial fleet waiting for them. 11,000 warships against 40-7. Daniel Morris looked at the tactical display and felt no fear. He thought about all the beings who had suffered under Imperial rule. He thought about all the species that had been twisted and broken by Imperial tampering. He thought about the future that humanity was fighting to create. He opened a channel to the entire fleet. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke. He told them that today they would write history. Today they would end an empire that had oppressed the galaxy for 12,000 years. Today they would show the universe what free humans could accomplish when they set their minds to liberation. The human fleet accelerated toward the Imperial formation. The final battle for galactic freedom had begun. The Battle of Corvus Prime would be remembered for centuries as the day the galaxy changed forever. Military historians would study it for generations, trying to understand how 47 ships defeated 11,000. The answer was simple. Technology and determination had proven more powerful than numbers and fear. Admiral Lisa Grant commanded the human fleet from the bridge of the USS Liberty. Her ship emerged from fold space at the center of the Imperial formation, rather than approaching from outside. The Imperial commanders had expected the humans to attack from a distance. They had positioned their ships to create overlapping fields of fire against an approaching enemy. Instead, the enemy appeared among them like ghosts, materializing from empty air. The Imperial fleet fell into chaos immediately. Ships that had been pointing their weapons outward now found enemies beside them and behind them and above them. Commanders screamed orders that contradicted each other. Vessels tried to turn and target the human ships, but their movements brought them into collision courses. With their own allies, Captain Daniel Morris led the first assault wing directly at the Imperial command ship. The Valor punched through the formation like a bullet through paper. Its railguns fired in continuous bursts, each shot precisely calculated to disable rather than destroy whenever possible. Humanity had come to liberate the galaxy, not to commit genocide against Imperial species. Commander Katie Sullivan coordinated targeting solutions across multiple vectors. Her voice remained calm and steady as she directed fire against Imperial weapon systems and shield generators. Every shot that Reinberg fired hit exactly where she told him to aim. The Imperial ships fell dark one after another as their offensive capabilities were surgically removed. Hi, Commander Torvax watched flagship as the human vessels tore through his fleet. He had commanded Imperial forces for over a century. He had crushed rebellions that seemed impossible to defeat. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans moved with a precision and coordination that seemed almost supernatural. He ordered his ships to concentrate fire on the nearest human vessel. 200 Imperial cruisers turned their weapons on the USS Horizon and fired everything they had. Plasma beams and fusion missiles and particle cannons all struck the small human ship at the same moment. The Horizon's shields flickered under the assault. For a moment, it seemed like the ship would be destroyed. Then it returned fire with a single weapon that High Commander Torvax had never seen before. The beam was invisible, except for a slight distortion in space where it passed. When it struck his flagship, the entire forward section simply vanished. Torvax died instantly as the atmosphere on his bridge evacuated into space. His last thought was one of strange admiration. The humans were magnificent. The battle lasted 4 hours, but the outcome was decided in the first 20 minutes. The human fleet had disabled the Imperial command structure so quickly that the remaining ships could not coordinate their defense. Individual captains tried to fight back, but they were operating blind without central command. Some Imperial ships attempted to flee. The fold drives on the human vessels allowed them to pursue and intercept any retreating enemies. Some Imperial captains chose to surrender rather than face destruction. Daniel Morris accepted every surrender and directed the captive vessels to hold position until the battle was complete. By the end of the fourth hour, 7,000 Imperial ships had been disabled or destroyed. 43 human vessels remained combat effective. The largest fleet in galactic history had been broken by a force that was outnumbered more than 200 to 1. Grand Empress Vexera watched the battle from her throne room through holographic displays. She saw her empire crumble in real time. She saw 12,000 years of conquest and domination reduced to floating wreckage and surrendered crews. She felt something she had not experienced in 3 millennia. She felt despair. Human Marines began landing on the throne world within hours of the fleet's defeat. They descended from dropships in armored suits, carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They moved through the Imperial capital with precise coordination, securing government buildings and military installations. Sergeant Nicole Webb led the assault team that breached the Imperial Palace. She had volunteered for this mission because she understood what it meant. She had studied the Empire for 20 years. She knew every detail of its crimes against sentient life. Walking into the throne room of the Grand Empress felt like the culmination of her entire existence. Vexera's guards surrendered without fighting. They had seen what happened to the Imperial fleet. They had no desire to share the fate of High Commander Torvax. They dropped their weapons and stepped aside as Nicole approached the ancient throne. The Empress looked down at the small human standing before her. Nicole Webb seemed so fragile compared to the massive Koran guards who had protected Vexera for centuries. But there was something in the human's eyes that made the Empress understand why her empire had fallen. Nicole announced that Grand Empress Vexera was under arrest for crimes against sentient life. The Galactic Empire was dissolved effective immediately. All enslaved populations were hereby declared free. The human woman's voice echoed through the throne room with absolute authority. Vexera asked a single question. She wanted to know how humanity had become what it was. She wanted to understand how a species so young had defeated an empire so ancient. Nicole considered the question carefully. Behind her, through the shattered windows of the palace, she could see the lights of celebrating cities. Slaves were realizing that their chains had been broken. Beings who had known only servitude for generations were discovering that freedom was finally real. She told the Empress the truth. The Empire had tried to domesticate humanity before humans knew the Empire existed. The Empire had sent a probe to make humans compliant and obedient like all the other species it had conquered. But the Empire had failed. Humans had remained free. And free humans, given 2 centuries to prepare, would find a way to bring down any obstacle in their path. It was simply what humans did. Daniel Morris walked through the corridors of the Imperial Palace as the fighting ended. Katie Sullivan walked beside him. Her uniform was stained with smoke and sweat from hours of coordinating the assault. She looked exhausted, but her eyes shone with satisfaction. She said that they had done it. They had actually done it. The Galactic Empire was finished. Daniel nodded slowly. He told her that the hard part was only beginning. They needed to build something better now. They needed to make sure the Empire's fall did not create chaos that would lead to more suffering. 400 billion beings needed help rediscovering what it meant to be free. Katie asked if he thought humanity could manage such a task. Daniel smiled and said that humans would figure it out. They always did. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, beings who had known only servitude looked up at the sky and felt hope for the first time in their lives. The news spread faster than light through every communication system in existence. The Empire had fallen. The humans had come. Freedom was real. A new era had begun. The galaxy would never be the same. And humanity stood ready to help build a future where every sentient being could determine their own destiny. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter that night.